Welcome everyone to the Lifelines module. And in here, we're going to be talking about relationships with other people and how to identify proper relationships with people and with God. So, when the Lord created Adam and Eve in the original design, He created them to walk in fellowship with Him. That Eve was created to be a helper for Adam, and that they were to go together in equal partnership, helping one another to take care of what the Lord had entrusted to them. Unfortunately, what happened in the fall, when the original sin was committed, then family dynamics were then established. And unfortunately, over the course of human history, what we have done as humans is we have put other people in the place where God should be. Because back in the original design, people were created to have their needs met by God. And we were designed with the need to be loved and wanted and accepted, that walking in fellowship with God, which we were to get from God Himself. Eve was not supposed to get it from Adam, nor Adam from Eve. They were to get it in fellowship with God and God alone. However, after the fall, when those family dynamics changed, and the Lord said that for Eve, that her desire would now be for her husband, that things got a little skewed. In what happens is our thinking is that in our relationships, what happens is we try to get those needs fulfilled by other people rather than God and God alone. The problem is is that when we seek our affirmations from other people who have shattered mindsets just as bad, if not worse, as we do, then we have to ask ourselves, is that really where I want to get my affirmations from? Where I want to get those needs fulfilled by people who have shattered mindsets and wrong thinkings, just like I do? Because they're not even walking in truth. Why in the world would I want to get my validation from somebody who has those broken mindsets, if you will? Remember, we were created to be helpers to one another, not to fulfill that need. We were still meant to get our needs fulfilled by God and God alone. That never changed. Because, I mean, honestly, with those people who have broken mindsets, they can't see the bigger picture. They can't see wholeness. They can't see as God does. So it is only God who can truly give us our worth and our value and love unconditional, that is not altered by any kind of broken mindset, any kind of wrong thinking, any kind of agenda. God does not have an agenda to get you to do anything. He loves you regardless of whether you accept it or not. He loves you, and that's all He wants, is that fellowship, to walk with you and to be with you and to be in that constant communication with you. And this all really came about when I knew some people, I mean, different friends in different scenarios, and really I began to ask myself, and just watching how their lives were affected in certain relationships, if a relationship broke up, or how they interacted with other people. And I began to just look at them and ask, really, why is it that some people come out of a bad relationship and they are relatively fine? They go on with life. Yes, it was a point of hurt for them. It was a point of sorrow, and I'm sure it wasn't very pleasing to them, but they are able to continue on in the course of their life. However, I have had other friends where there has been a breakup, somebody has left their life, and it devastated them. I mean, they literally, well, emotionally, they became stuck in their life and they were unable to move on past the hurt of that event. And so I was looking at these two different people and asking why. What is the difference? What is happening that I'm not seeing? And the Lord really revealed to me it's where their lifelines were connected. So the person who came out of the relationship that was a breakup for them and they were able to move on with their life, they had a unique relationship with God where their worth and value came from God and God alone. And really it was that lifeline that was stuck into God. And so he was able to pour truth into them. And that, yes, it was a hard and turbulent time in that person's life, but they were able to work through the emotions. They were able to have a proper perspective and really able to walk in the freedom of who God created them to be. And the other person, on the other hand, who didn't know God, they and they were devastated in their relationship. Really, what the Lord showed me is that they had plugged their lifelines, those needs that each and every one of us have that we want fulfilled. They plugged them into that other person. So when the other person severed those lifelines, they began to die. That person began to die emotionally because they didn't have the truth coming in from God, the only one who can give us the real truth and proper perspective. It is only Him. And so the Lord really showed me that we have to be careful. We have to be careful that we don't try and seek our validations and our get our love and our worth and our value, those things that He is telling us that and filling in us, that we don't plug into our helpers, we plug into the Creator. So beloved, please know that is the relationship that we must keep in proper alignment, that people are helpers. They have not been our creator, nor will they ever be. And they do not define us. And so to seek our validation and our worth and our value from people that we were never meant to will eventually end up keeping us in a place of spiritual and emotional stuntedness. And for example, I mean, I love that God gave me Vince, and that Vince loves me, and that he tells me that he loves me, and that he shows me that he loves me. But if Vince came to me and said, Missy, I don't want to be married to you anymore, yes, I would absolutely be hurt, and I would cry, and I would feel loss and sorrow, but it wouldn't devastate me, because I know where my hope comes from. I know where my worth and value, my identity comes from. It doesn't come from him. It doesn't come from my parents, whether they raised me good or bad, whether they spoke life or death to me. It doesn't matter. That is not where my value comes from. My value comes from the Lord. And so when we recognize where we have that the lifelines improperly placed in people, we can unplug them and plug them into the only one who can give us a true picture of who we are and our worth and value. And the problem that comes with improperly placed lifelines is that if we plug them in to the wrong person, which any person is really the wrong person, but then they begin to speak words that are not true over us, we will tend to believe them, and we let those words form our identity. Those form a picture of who we are. And that, honestly, that can be very bad, because I've had people speak into my life, people that I've respected, that I thought knew that I would consider to be mentors, even people in my own family I've allowed to speak into me. And let me tell you, sometimes they weren't always positive, and I allowed it to stick to me. I allowed it to shape me. I allowed it to form opinions about myself that should have never been there. And the whole while, God is, He's telling me, Missy, don't listen to them. Missy, up here, I'm up here. Look up here. Look to me. Listen to me. And so he really had to show me to cut those lifelines to the helpers, because we absolutely are just like the parable, or it's not a parable, I'm sorry, the story in the Bible where the four friends took their one friend who was crippled on a mat, and the four of them picked him up and dug a hole in the roof and put him at the feet of Jesus. That is what our role is that we are never meant to be the fixers. We are never meant to be the author and finisher of anybody. We are to get them to the feet of Jesus. It is only Jesus who can fix them, if you will. It is only Jesus who can heal them. They couldn't help their friend walk as much as they wanted to. They could not heal his lameness, but Jesus can. And that's the same for us today. It's no different. It's absolutely no different. And that we are to be helpers. So, beloved, please be cautious in where you are allowing that validation to come from. It is not meant to come from people. And I wrote a story called Journey Beyond the Gate, and in it there's an encounter that the hero of the story, if you will, her name is Josephine Smith, the main character, and she meets this kind man named Mr. John, and Mr. John takes her to his father's adventure park. And in the adventure park, this will be a recounting of her first encounter, but it's all about Jo learning how to see herself as God does. And so, in the first encounter, it is really a story about arrows, but it's the same thing as what happens when we misplace those lifelines and we allow those poisonous words to come and stick on us and stick in us and really truly cause us to have the wrong mindset, to have us think and see in a way that we were never meant to. And how important it is to get rid of those and see ourselves how God sees us. So if you would like to follow along while I read this story, it's on page 39 of your book, or you can just sit back and just close your eyes and just listen and let this become your journey, right? I closed my eyes, pushed open the door, and took a step inside. The door shut behind me, and I found myself standing in a huge open hall that was poorly lit and completely empty, except for something or someone standing at the opposite end of the room. This was not at all what I had imagined or expected. I squinted hard in order to see who or what was standing at the end of the hall. It appeared to be a person, so I called out to see if he or she could direct me to where I was supposed to go. There was no response, so I began walking toward the figure to see what it was. The hall was strangely quiet, and as I started walking, each of my footsteps boomed on the stone floor, then echoed resoundingly off of the walls. Soon it became a comforting melody that replaced the eerie silence of the room. As I got closer, I could see that it was indeed a person, or at least something like a person. I finally found myself standing face to face with myself. Was this supposed to be a joke? I was confronted with a perfect likeness of Josephine Ann Smith. The only difference between my real life body and the lifeless one in front of me was that it had hundreds of arrows sticking into it, covering it almost entirely. There were clusters of arrows in the heart area and in the head, but the arrows were everywhere. They seemed to be ordinary arrows, although I noticed that some of the tips were different from the others. Many were what I would consider regular arrowheads, similar to pictures I had seen in stories about Native Americans. Others looked charred and burnt, as if they had been on fire at some point. The area around where the arrowhead pierced the skin was charred and burnt as well. The third type of arrow was very different from the other two. This particular type of arrow puzzled me for a minute. The part of the arrowhead that was still visible was coated with some sort of thick green liquid that discolored every part of the arrow it touched. On the skin of the Josephine-like image was the same green discoloration. It wasn't just on the surface of the skin, it also went deep down beneath the skin in trails that vanished far below the surface. I bent down to examine it further and recoiled back at the toxic odor that it emitted. I guessed that it was some sort of poison. I definitely didn't want to mess with those arrows. Just to the right of the body was a small placard that read, "The key to move forward you will only find when you learn to leave your past behind." What key? I wondered. I shrugged my shoulders, not knowing what this riddle meant, and then turned my attention back to the body. I studied her for a few minutes, wondering what all this meant and what I was supposed to do. As I looked over the horrific scene in front of me, my focus stopped abruptly when I gazed into her eyes. They were not the eyes of a doll or a stuffed animal. They actually seemed to be alive. Not only did there seem to be life, but there was something else deep within them which kept me staring, wanting to know what it was. I took a step forward to get a better look, trying to make sense of what was going on. A small cry escaped my mouth when I finally understood what I was looking at. It was pain that I saw in her eyes. That pain was the exact same pain that I felt deep within me, and I tried so very hard to hide. Staring at her and knowing exactly what she was feeling made the hurt inside of me burn so fiercely that I thought I might die. I bit my lip in an attempt to keep back the tears that were welling up. I wanted to look the other way, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't turn my eyes away from the pain in hers. As if in a dream, I felt myself reaching up to touch the eyes of the girl who bore my resemblance. As I did so, my hand brushed the end of an arrow, to which I immediately looked down. I had been so focused on her eyes that I had completely forgotten about the arrows. I was so close to them now. The smell was nauseating, and I could see the countless trails of poison deep beneath the surface of the skin, as well as the charred flesh where the flaming arrows had gone in. What kind of sick and cruel person would do such a thing? I was beginning to regret coming to this place, and a surge of fear was growing inside of me. Taking in the whole scene and feeling utterly helpless to do anything for this girl that stood before me, I became overwhelmed and started to panic. I didn't know what to do. I was furious at whoever would display such a gruesome image, and then to have her look just like me was more that I could bear. As if a switch had been flipped on inside of me, my fright instantly became anger and my jaws became firm and tightly clenched. My face told the story of the anger within me, and I was determined to free this poor girl in front of me. Then, after she was free, I would leave this awful place. I grabbed a hold of an arrow, intending to pull it out of her body, but as soon as I touched it, the most extraordinary thing happened. "Maybe someday you'll be good enough," a man called out as soon as my fingers touched the arrow shaft. The voice seemed to be familiar and sounded like a school teacher I once had. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I asked as I dropped my hand back to my side and turned to see who was speaking to me. No one was there. I was still completely alone. Again, I reached for another arrow, and just as my fingers touched it, I heard, "You're not smart enough to be in our group." This time, I knew instantly who said it and the exact moment it had been thrown at me. In my fright, my hand tightened around the arrow, and as I turned to see if she was with me, the arrow came out too. "Trisha, is that you? Hello?" I called out again. Once more, silence was the only response. I turned back to the likeness of myself and couldn't believe what I saw. There, in the place where the tip had pierced the skin, was the word "brilliant." The word completely covered over where the wound had been created by the arrow. I grabbed another arrow and heard my dad yelling, "What's the matter with you? Can't you do anything right?" Then another, "You bozo, why are you so stupid?" In a rush of determination, I began furiously pulling out every arrow that plagued this poor creature. In the flurry of touching the arrows, the voices filled the room as I heard each one called out, "I hate you. You don't have what it takes. Maybe someday you'll be pretty. It's all your fault. What kind of person would do something like that? You aren't skinny enough." On and on the scenes of the murderous words replayed before me until I could not bear it anymore. With the loudest scream I could manage, I tried to drown out the words that were playing over and over on an old tape recorder stuck inside of my head. The words were not going away, and the more I screamed, the louder they became. Tormented, I put my hands over my ears and shook my head violently, again trying to get rid of the voices that sounded in my mind. In a blinding rage, I began ripping arrow after arrow out as fast as I could, trying not to feel the blows from all the awful words that had hurt me so deeply throughout my life. It wasn't until I grabbed the very first arrow once again that I stopped to pay attention to what was actually happening. "Maybe someday you'll be good enough," my teacher's voice repeated. The impact of the words hit me once again, forcing the wound to go deeper within her body. I never wanted to hear those words again, and in my determination, I took the arrow firmly in my hand and I yanked it as hard as I could. Amazed, I watched as I saw the words "fully equipped" emerge to cover over the side of the wound. Once the words appeared, there was no longer any evidence of the original brutality. Its place remembered it no longer. I looked back to the places where I had just removed all of those other horrible arrows and saw words of life and encouragement that hadn't been there before. Frantically, I began pulling the rest out, reliving the events all over again, as well as the pain of each and every stinging word that had and still hurt me. I reached out to grab a poison-tipped arrow from Josephine's heart, my heart, and stopped cold when I heard the curse that went with it. "You are nothing special, and you will never amount to anything." As I heard the words again, the pain cut me just as deeply as on the day they had been spoken to me. The voice of the archer was very familiar to me, and I recognized it at once. It was the voice of someone I had loved and admired, and she was supposed to have loved me too. The memory of that moment seemed so real that if I closed my eyes, I could see her standing right in front of me, pouring those words over me again. Still weeping, I opened my eyes to look at where the arrow had punctured me, and the mortal wound began to bleed afresh. As I watched the blood run down the front of my body, I began sobbing. The bleeding brought back every painful moment of that encounter. I pulled on it and pulled on it, trying to remove the arrow, but the arrowhead and its poison only went deeper into my heart. My pain was unbearable. Exhausted, I sank hopelessly to the ground. I was helpless to do anything but sit there and sob because I didn't have the strength to pull the arrow out. This arrowhead was buried far too deep beneath the skin's surface and would not come out as easily as the others had done. As I sat there, the words continued to haunt me, beating me further into the ground. Finally, out of sheer desperation, I screamed out as loud as I could, "I can't do this anymore! This hurts too badly and I can't make it stop! I need help, please! Won't someone help me?" Crying uncontrollably, I put my head down and desperately wished that I was anywhere but here. I didn't hear him come in, but when I finally looked up again, I saw Mr. John standing in front of me. I don't know how long he had been there, but I was relieved that he was there and grateful that I was no longer alone. Too exhausted from pulling out the arrows and reliving every awful memory that went with each one, I didn't even have the strength to stand up and seek refuge and comfort in his open arms. Helplessly, I just looked up at him with pleading eyes and a tear-streaked face. Mr. John bent down and gently lifted me to my feet. He tenderly rocked me in his arms for what seemed an eternity and sang a soft and soothing song over me that stirred something within. As I listened intently to every word he sang, I found that my tears had completely stopped. He sang, "Peace be still, my little one. Love and healing have now begun. I chose you first from long ago. Those who are mine, I'll never let go. Find your strength and rest in me, my precious one, your royalty." I began to feel safe and peaceful here with my friend. In fact, I had never felt so loved or protected before in all my life. I never wanted to leave those loving arms and face the cruel, heartless world again. "It's all right, child. I'm here to help you," he whispered over me. "Joe, reach out your hand and grab the arrow again. This time we will pull together." With all the strength I could muster, I put my hand on the arrow and let out a heavy sigh. As I began to pull, I noticed that Mr. John's hand was on top of mine. Unlike when I tried on my own, this time the arrow came out so easily that I didn't even realize it was out until I saw the word royalty take its place. Take the place of the poison wound. Rubbing my fingers over the previously infected flesh, I looked closer and saw that all of the poison had been drawn out along with the arrow. Nothing remained of the damage it had done to me. With renewed strength, Mr. John and I removed every arrow until all that remained of her body were words of life. All of the arrows lay in a heaping pile at my feet, no longer able to wield their destructive and deadly blows. I didn't really know exactly what to do next. Should I run away or get angry at having to go through such a horrid experience? Perhaps I should thank Mr. John for his help and then scold him for taking so long to help me. I didn't know what else to do, so I just stood there in front of the freed and healed Josephine Ann Smith and began celebrating with her for her newfound freedom. The pain in her eyes was gone, and upon that realization, I stepped back and put my hands upon my own heart. Could it be that my pain was gone too? I looked up at Mr. John in amazement. With excited laughter, I said, "It's not there anymore. The heart of my heart, it isn't there. You took it out." All at once, I started jumping up and down, screaming with joy. For the first time in a long time, I could actually breathe without feeling the sting from the pain that had lived inside of me for so many years. With my arms wide open, I started twirling around in circles until I fell down from dizziness. When I hit the ground, I started to laugh like never before. I laughed for so long that my face and chest began to hurt. I didn't mind though. I was free and my inner pain was gone. Mr. John joined in my marvelous celebration and he too began to laugh the laugh of joy. How I had ever been able to live with all of that hurt, I'll never know. But right now, I wasn't about to figure it out. Finally, regaining my composure, Mr. John helped me to my feet and gave me a big hug. Looking back over to my body, I read all of the words that it so proudly displayed now. And then I turned to Mr. John and asked, "Mr. John, what do all these words mean? Please tell me what just happened." "My dear Joe, these words that you see are the words that describe who you really are. You were never meant to receive those curses that hurt you so. You have been made special and wonderful. There is no one else like you, nor will there ever be. Don't you see that you're amazing and that you never have to compare yourself to anyone else or try to measure up to another individual? You have your own path that you must walk in life, and what has been given to someone else will not be what you need for your journey. I promise you that if you allow my Father and me to help you, you will never be unprepared or average ever again. The words Mr. John spoke seemed to soothe my very soul, and I needed to hear more. You have more power than you realize, Joe. Average was never supposed to be a word used to describe you. In fact, there is nothing average about you. You still have many things to learn, but just as a baby bird must learn how to fly, you too must learn the basics. But one day, oh, one day, you will soar with the wings of eagles. You will do great things with my help. Now you have the ability to heal others whose hearts are hurting just like yours did for so long. You will no longer be the target. Instead, you will be the archer. But you will use arrows that I will give you, arrows that will hit the mark every time and will bring life rather than death to whomever they hit. You will shoot straight and sure, not by natural ability, but by the supernatural ability I give you, so that you will never miss what you are aiming at. Turning from Mr. John, I stood face to face with the likeness of myself, and I saw for the first time in my life something good inside me. I saw a girl who had been trying to be so many other people, trying to imitate the abilities that got others noticed. I saw that she had buried who she really was and had been too scared to let her true self shine. A smile grew across my face as I read the words that had taken the place of the wretched arrows. Blessed, beautiful, gifted, powerful, precious, beloved, fully equipped, heir. The words echoed through my mind. Could these really be true? Am I really all of those things? I didn't feel like what they described. I still felt like the same old me. My heart quickened and my eyes filled with tears as I came across the word royalty written over where that awful poison dart had pierced my heart. Oh, if it could only be true. I didn't know exactly what it meant, but I sure liked the sound of it. I replayed the word over and over in my mind, hoping with all of my heart that it was true, but fully expecting it to disappear and another word take its place. How in the world could royalty and Josephine Ann Smith go together in the same sentence without the word not along with them? The vision of the arrowless figure was burning a permanent image in my mind. I desperately tried to remember every detail so that when things got tough for me, I could look back to this very moment and remember how I was transformed. I never wanted to forget this day, even if it turned out to be a dream. Never. As I reached out to touch the display, Mr. John said that it was time to move forward. But I don't have the key. The inscription said there had to be a key, I replied. The key is found when the wounds of your past are healed. Only then will you be able to see the light that has always been right there in front of you. You can now move from the darkness of your past into the light of your future. Mr. John responded as he took my hand and showed me a small ray of light coming from a door directly behind where the figure stood. Are you ready to go forward? Will you be with me? I asked, secretly praying that I wouldn't have to be alone anymore. Always, he reassured. And isn't that just like God? He is always with us. Jesus is always with us. He walks along our journey with us. He never leaves us, ever. So please know that He is right there with you, helping you, teaching you, encouraging you. All right. So with that, um, we're going to ask you to go through and do a worksheet where you are going to identify your own arrows or your own misplaced lifelines, if you will, those places where you have a relationship with somebody that has caused hurts and wounds and that need restoration. So just to give you an example of what this is going to look like, I'm going to walk through just a few of my most hurtful and influential arrows, if you will. All right. So my first arrow is unloved. Now, I know I mentioned this in another module, but really there were people in my life and in my family that really nothing I could do was ever good enough. Even if I tried my hardest, there was always criticism and why can't you do it better and why shouldn't you should do this and you make horrible decisions and on and on. Nothing, I'm telling you, it was not ever good enough. And so, and then with that, um, I had some people in my family who were very mean to me physically. And so with that, I began to really question, am I worthy of love? Because if they loved me, they would not treat me like this. They would be kind to me. They would protect me. And so because they act like this to me, they must not love me. I must be unloved and I must be unlovable. And so I really walked through life with that mindset that you know what, I am unlovable. And you know what, here's the crazy thing, because I'm just going to tell you, I had people in my life who absolutely loved me and poured into me and showed me what kindness and goodness and love. But you know what, it I couldn't see it. I couldn't see it because all I could see was this lack in my life, this criticism, this uncompleteness, if you will. Even though I had an example of love and uh, unselfish, unconditional love in my life, I still had this over here that was so much louder than this. And it really overshadowed and it got in the way of me seeing what was already in my life. And I think many of us do that because that need that we've been created by God, and when we don't get it in an area, that becomes the loudest part of our life, unfortunately. And that's why we always must keep that relationship with God intact and find that, yes, this is awesome that it just kind of reiterates what I have with God, and this will have zero voice to me because I have this relationship with God that He is pouring into me, and this will never have any kind of stage, any kind of say, any kind of influence on my life ever again when I have that right relationship. All right, so my second arrow is worthless. And this one, actually, I don't know why I put it as number 2 because this was the biggest one in my whole entire life. The glasses that I was looking through, I mean, they were gigantic, and the filter, it was just as big, and everything that I did was dictated through worthless. And the Lord showed me where I got this. So when I was about 12 years old, 12, 13, I was washing off the our deck in the back of our house, and just squirting a hose and getting all the dirt off. Well, my dad comes out and he proceeded to rip into me up one side, down the other, and telling me in some not very kind words what how stupid I was, what an idiot, why can I do anything right, and that's not how you do it, and blah blah blah. And really, I mean, it seems rather trivial, if you will. It seems rather not a big deal, but you have to understand that this was like the straw that broke the camel's back, because there were 12 years previous to this point of you can't do anything right, you can't do anything right, on and on and on and on. And then this just came to me where I said, oh my gosh, I can't even squirt a hose right, I must be completely worthless. And that's where I got that filter from. That one event, I allowed that filter to dictate how I saw myself, choices that I made, decisions in my life. And I'm so glad that one's gone, and we're going to get rid of yours as well. All right. So my next arrow was invisible. So my parents divorced when I was 5 years old. And so I lived back and forth between my mom's house and my dad's house my whole entire life. So from kindergarten to, and plus with my mom, we moved around a lot. Being a single mom, didn't always have a lot of money, didn't always have a lot of anything. And so we had to move from place to place. So from kindergarten to 12th grade, I went to 14 different schools. So the reason why I say invisible, because I was always the new kid in school. And just to help you understand, always the new kid. So from kindergarten to second grade, I went to the same school. And then from 10th grade to 12th grade, I went to the same school. So the remaining 7 years in my academic career, I went to 12 different schools. And if you do the math, that's almost two schools a year. So when I say that I was always the new kid, I was always the new kid. And I mean, everybody's gone through school or been in some kind of environment where kids are there. And they had already formed their friend groups. And so trying to come in the middle of the year, I was always so grateful when I would be at the beginning of the year at a new school, because then the friend groups weren't always already established, though many were, because they were all at the school the previous year together and they just kind of move up in grade. But new kids come into the mix. And so I when I transferred in the middle of the year, I was the quiet, shy, awkward girl who always, just kind of stood in the back of the playground waiting for somebody to come to me and say, do you want to be my friend? Do you want to come? And that rarely happened. I'm just telling you. So that's why I just always felt like I was invisible. Nobody ever saw me. People didn't remember my name because I in fourth grade, for goodness sakes, I transferred in the middle of the year, and my teacher called me Melody for like the first 2 months of school. She couldn't even get Missy right. And so I was Melody for the first 2 months of me being in my fourth grade class. And so it was just that constant reminder. It was experience after experience that I was invisible, that I didn't matter, that I was worthless. All right. So my next arrow, stupid. Well, when you transfer into different classes and different schools, they're not always academically at the same place. And well, I'll just tell you, for instance, I moved from Colorado to Las Vegas, Nevada, again in the fourth grade. This was a mid-year transfer. And we hadn't even learned yet in fourth grade long division. I moved to Las Vegas. They had already moved on from long division. And so they were already doing things, and I had no idea. They had that little long division sign, and I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I just sat as she was going over things, just kind of reviewing. And and it was completely new to me. I had never even seen it. And they were given the answers, and they all knew. So then I was always that special kid who had to stay in from recess and get extra help from the teacher to get caught up wherever I was going. And one saving grace is that in English I always excelled. So at least in English I always had that one basic, because I love English and I love learning and I love reading, and so that part saved me. But the math and science and everything else, it was all new concepts to me, and I just always felt behind, and it just made me feel stupid because I would constantly have to ask for help. And then my last one is ugly. I can't even tell you how many times I've heard, well, maybe someday you'll be pretty. Maybe someday you won't look like that. And I mean, it's just that sarcastic joking that we talked about earlier in the importance of language module. But you know what? It still hurts. Even though there was joking involved, I believe with all my heart that there was truth in what they were saying to me, but they just kind of, tried to brush it off as with I'm just joking. But it hurt me. It left me realizing that, you know what? There's something wrong with me. That and then being on top of that, then being the new kid every time, the invisible, shy, quiet, and I was chubby as a kid. And so I was always the fat weird girl who never spoke and who always had to stay in from recess to get help from the teacher. So it just, I never had any boyfriends as a young girl, and into my teenage years I never had a boyfriend, and now I realize that that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you're going through that, you think something is wrong with you and that I must be ugly because boys don't like me. But, beloved, this is what God said about me. God says I am loved. He says I'm worthy. He says I'm seen. He says I am uniquely gifted. And he says I am wonderfully made. So he took all those arrows, and just like in the story, he broke them and they lay at my feet. And this is how I see myself. And I pray that you can walk through this exercise, and they might not all sink in at first. It might take months. It did for me. It really did. I'm going to be honest with you that it wasn't an overnight thing, that it was beginning to train my mindset to begin to catch those places where I was allowing stuff to slip through. I was putting that filter there myself. And so instead of using identity as my main filter and allowing that information to only pass through, everything else had to be left behind because it can't pass through the identity filter. So please know that it is a process. The Lord is with you. The Lord is going to walk you through this process until this is how you know yourself. So when somebody says, oh, Missy, you're ugly, I can say, well, that's your opinion and that's fine. But you know what? The Lord says I'm wonderfully made, and he made me just as he wanted me to be made, and he sees me as beautiful. So you know what? That's okay. You can have your opinion, and I'm okay with that. It's not going to alter how I see myself. So on workbook page 46, there are 2 questions. So what arrows or lifelines do you need to remove with the help of Jesus? And also, what are the new words he has replaced those arrows with? And please, beloved, know that don't leave them in this book. If you do not know them with every fiber of your being, write those on your mirror too, right along with your confession. Write those words of life. I am loved. I am seen. I am wonderfully made. I am who God says I am. You write those confessions wherever. If you have to write it on your sun visor, so while you're driving, you could just glance up and see it, do it. Don't stare at them. Watch the road. But write them wherever you spend time. Write them out so you constantly have that reminder until it becomes who you are. All right. So remember, we always want to keep our identity in mind. So it is, please remember that if it does not agree with that you are an eternal being, that you are a child of God, that you are forgiven, and that you are loved unconditionally, and that you are created uniquely and with gifts and talents and purpose by God himself. If it does not line up with those 5 things, your identity, then you need to reevaluate. You still have arrows there that you need to reevaluate, pull those out, break those, and find the words of life that God says about you. Absolutely find those words. So I pray for you right now. I pray that God will give you revelation, that He will give you strength and courage to walk through this process, because I know, beloved, you have to go back. You have to go back to those experiences. You don't have to relive the entire event, but just go back. When this happened in my life, when I had that encounter with my dad on the deck, I didn't have to go and relive every single second of that moment. I recognized, the Lord showed me that that is where I got worthless. And so He said, no, you are not worthless. And He said, you break those. And so we broke that arrow, and I am uniquely gifted. And so I pray that you will that you will have the strength and courage to walk through those events, and that you will find healing in His arms, healing in the embrace of Jesus. And as you walk through these questions, beloved, know that He is with you and He wants you to be free. He is pouring out those words of life over you. So go spend time, don't rush this, and go and see what the Lord says. And I pray healing for you, and I can't wait to hear how your journey is going and those words of life that He has spoken over you. So God bless.